Welcome back to the sim. So in this one, we're headed back into the TBM 930 and we're taking the Bravo throttle quadrant and we're getting it set up so that we can control that H-shaped throttle lever and making it all work seamlessly with the Bravo. Let's go ahead, jump in and get started. So when we come into SPAD.neXt and we come over to the controls, we want to make sure we select our Bravo throttle quadrant. We need to have our buttons and switches all set up and matching, otherwise you'll have events that aren't present. You could head over to device settings, go to settings global, and this is the configuration I use for all of my Bravo profiles, or all of my plane profiles that use a Bravo. Now we've shown this before, so really quick, I do enable all the axes because all the throttle axes and mixtures and props or flaps, we're going to use them all mapped inside of SPAD.neXt. Now when you come down to the buttons, you're going to notice that button 1 through 8, so those are going to be the autopilot control buttons. Those we go ahead and we map them as push button type. Then button 9 through 12, these are the throttle reversers for the 4 axes. The middle have an extra switch on them. Button 13 and 14, this is the autopilot right side encoder. And of course encoders are really just 2 buttons, so we set those up as simple push buttons. 15 and 16 are more buttons. That is the flaps button. We leave those as a push button so that we will be able to have short presses, long presses, get a couple extra events out of them. 17 through 21 is the rotary selector on the left-hand side of the autopilot group, and that's what switches between altitude, VS, heading modes. 22 and 23, that's your trim wheel. So we also set it, because it's an encoder, to simple mode. Then 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. These are the lower detents on the first 5 throttle axes. So this is when you lock it down into the bottom detent. It is a button, so we set those up as switch modes. Then we've got 29 and 30. These are buttons that will be the go-around buttons depending on which throttle is your throttle number 1 lever. 29 is linked to the first 2 axes, so the Y and the X axis, and then 30 is actually the 3rd axis. 31, 32, 33, 34, those are additional switches. 34 is the first rocker switch, putting in switch mode, and the bottom, which does have a button, we disable. That way we get out of the UI. This way we actually leverage the fact that we can use switch modes, so an on and off state. Then they alternate. 36 is a switch, 37 is off, 38 is a switch, 39 is off, 40 is a switch, and so we do that for all 7 rockers. And then finally 48, that's a push button because that is the 5th axis, the RX axis. When it has a 4 throttle in it, you can put another ToGa. So that's the important thing. Make sure that all of your configuration matches mine. Now that we've done that, click on any button or axis. Go to online snippets. We're going to come into online snippets. We're going to go to the Bravo throttle quadrant. We're going to come down to the complete device, and we are going to keep this for only current aircraft. This one is very specific with the way that throttle quadrant moves. You're going to have to modify it if you want to use this for another plane, so I did not publish this for all aircraft. I published it specifically for the TBM. So you're going to go ahead, you're going to click on that. You'll get the comment description of the whole purpose, what it's for, and which aircraft it was intended for. We're going to go ahead and click OK. And it'll ask us, do we want to replace all events? We're going to go ahead and say yes. And just like that, you now have everything ready to go. We're going to go ahead, bring in this image of the actual throttle quadrant, remind us where the buttons are, make it a little bit easier. First thing I want to talk about is what we did with the axes. we've really only got 3 levers connected, and the other 3 have got their little protectors on. So the first axis, the one on the left, the y-axis, for this one to the left, that is the one that is running throttle without reverser for engine 1. Full thrust is 1023, 0 for base thrust, or idle, I should say. So we've got nothing mapped to the x-axis. Then we come to the RZ axis, and this is where it's going to get interesting. This is what we're doing with what looks like a prop lever. We first applied a propeller pitch axis for engine 1, but we set it so that full up is low pitch, and then we pulled it back, and then we set that value. So it comes down to the second line towards the 75% type range. What we've done is we created for ourselves a region where the prop lever takes place. At the bottom of the axis, we went to a range definition. We moved it to the bottom, so we said yes. We set that to 0. And then we came up to basically 399, so we were below that other 400 range. Doesn't matter that there's a gap. And we set that, and then we did a rescale of the value. And we wanted to go from 0 to 4915. And we wanted to apply that to throttle 1 set. And we're using the axis value, and we're using the raw data so that it uses the rescale value. And this is what sets it up so that at the bottom portion of the prop area, we're actually controlling throttle. The throttle is on the right side. It still moves from 0 to 4915. So we've now created a low, a high, 4915, and then using the propeller pitch, by moving from low to high, that's what now shifts the throttle over into the left side of the gate. And you'll see this all work really nice when we get into the sim. The RY axis, or the fourth axis, we've got nothing. The RX axis, we've got nothing, so 2 empty side by side. And then we go to the last one, and I went ahead and I used the flaps detent. Since on the throttle quadrant, it does have a little flaps lever to the right. Looking at the buttons. So button number 1, this is the button labeled heading. So as you can see over here on the layout, button number 1 points to it. So button number 1, when pressed short, we are doing AP panel heading hold. So this won't do heading hold lock, which would capture your current heading. This would allow you to have dialed up a heading, then enabled heading mode. If you do want to sync your heading bug, just hold it for 1 second. Now notice this says Airsoft 1000 PFD, so the G1000. This is actually a key event. It's not an HTML event. So this is just a SPAD.next doing the heading sync for us. So I left it in from just copying across the G1000 layout. Works perfect. Button number 2, this is the next button to the right, and the one labeled nav. And of course, autopilot, nav 1 hold. Button number 3, we are going to do the autopilot approach hold. Button number 4, currently this is set to Airsoft 1000 VNAV. This is a custom event that I created. That custom event sends the HTML event for the working title G1000 event. To do that, we just came over to add-ons, client events, and we created a AS1000 VNAV. So that was the name I gave it. It's a global event. And then I put in the H event, AS1000 underscore VNAV underscore toggle. We got this from the documentation that working title publishes. I put it into the Microsoft Flight Sim category, and I put a description so that it's clear that this is the new NXI VNAV H event. Real easy, right? Just keep in mind, this does nothing right now. In the standard Flight Sim Asobo 930, there is no active VNAV. We're just keeping this as a placeholder for when working title updates the 3000. For button number 5, this is the one labeled ALT. And for it, we went ahead with the autopilot panel altitude hold event. So this is going to toggle altitude hold, but this does not capture the altitude. If you want to capture the altitude instead, what you need to do is change this from the AP panel to just AP altitude hold. So if you do this event, this will toggle the altitude hold and it will capture your current altitude. Number 6 is the one labeled VS. So of course we're going to go ahead and put AP panel VS hold on. And number 7 is the flight level change Microsoft Flight Sim event. So again, that's found in the Microsoft Flight Sim grouping, not the SimConnect grouping. Now, if you want, you can hold it for longer than 1 second and it will copy your current speed into the airspeed hold variable that flight level change uses. The benefit of this is you might have pre-dialed up what you wanted and you don't want it capturing. You want to already have it set and just enable it. Button number 8 is the autopilot master button. So that's the button on the right hand side, and that is going to send the AP master event. 13 and 14 is the encoder, as you can see right here. So 13 is the clockwise turn, 14 is the counterclockwise turn. This is where we are reading the knob. So you'll notice that the knob selector on the left-hand side, the bottom one will be 17. So the one that is labeled IAS, so your flight level change speed mode, that's the bottom setting, and the top setting 21, that's your altitude setting. So what we're doing is we're doing a conditional event that looks at what is the button doing. So here we see the button 17, that is a 1. Then when we turn the knob, we are going to increment the autopilot airspeed hold variable by 1. And we always end processing with these types of events so that it doesn't go checking all the other events. The next one is going to be checking if instead it's 18, in which case we're going to change the OBI. So the VOR1, the OBS, we're going to increment or decrement. So this will change the course when you're on VOR1. What we've got is checking if it's button 19. If it's button 19, now we're doing heading lock direction by 1. Again, end processing. In VS mode, we're going to do 2 conditions and actually have 2 different things associated with the VS knob. If it's button 20, which is VS mode, and the autopilot is in vertical hold mode, then we're going to increment vertical hold variable by 100. So increase it by 100. If its pitch hold is equal to 1, then we're actually going to send the pitch reference increase up or increment up event. That VS will be able to do either VS mode or pitch mode, and we can control the pitch. Then what we've done for altitude is we're checking button 21 and we're checking to see that it's under 10,000 feet. We'll increment autopilot lock variable by 100. However, if it's between 10,000 and 18,000, we're going to go ahead and we're going to increment by 500s. Then once we get over 18,000, we're going to increment by thousands. And then what we did with button 14 is we just copied 13, pasted, and went in and changed everything from increments to decrements, and where they were send events from increments to decrements, and the up to a down. 15, so that is the flap lever. So we have the flaps increase. So when you push it down, that is button 15. So in the image, you can see that 15's on the bottom and 16's on the top. So when you push down, it will increment the flaps by 1 stage. If you hold it for longer than a second, it will go all the way down. 16 is the up direction. So again, press it once up, it will move the flaps up by 1 stage. Hold it up and it will move it all the way to the top. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Again, that's the left side selector. We are not using those with any events because we're able to just read our joystick, which is cool. So we don't even have to create some type of virtual or local variable that we were checking against. We just checked directly against these switches. So the trim wheel, when we trim down, we want to send the trim nose down event. And when we trim up or roll it down towards us, that's going to be the up event. 24. 24 is the first detent. Axis Y, when you drop it all the way down into the detent, it is a button. However, as you recall, we changed it into a switch mode, and that was so we could create our throttle reverser detent. And so what this allows us to do, because we don't have a range down here, we're going to send throttle 1 decrement, right, by 5. Minus 25 is full reverse thrust. We're going to then delay execution by 200 milliseconds. And by the way, a delay is a pause. So you would add action, hit pause, 200 milliseconds, and then it'll send the event again, pause, send the event, pause, send the event, pause, send the event. So 5 events in total to get us to full reverse thrust. And the reason for doing this with a switch on and putting all 5 events instead of it being a repeat is that way when we take it out of the detent, it will set the throttle cut. So previously when we did some of these things, we used the repeat event, and then when you took it out, it stopped repeating it, but it was still held. So you had to move the throttle a little bit forward to get the thrust to take it out of reverse thrust, and then you'd go back to idle. So with this setup, it has boom, full reverse thrust, and then when you just take it out of the detent, it automatically sets it to idle. 25 has nothing, and of course it's lit up right now because we've got it all the way down for the little holders, the little protector covers. On our extra axis that we're using for the right side of the H area, we are set up as a switch, and what we're doing is when switched on, we're going to check to make sure that the engine fuel valve set to 1, and if so, then we will cut the fuel valve. So therefore we will do a fuel cut, engine cut off. When we check to see that we switch it off, we're going to make sure that the engine fuel valve is a 0, and if so, we're going to toggle the fuel valve of engine 1 because we can't set it. For some reason it has to be a toggle, and that's what we did. That's how we do a check before we toggle. And at the same time, we're going to send set throttle 1 to 0, which will put it into the low idle. 27 is the next detent, the R y-axis, nothing there. 28, nothing there. 29. So this is the button on the first axis. So on y-axis, that's the button. So when we've got our GA throttle, number 1, we've got our red go round button. So we've got the auto throttle ToGa event, which will do our pitch up axes and give us our ToGa. 30 would be the third axis and its ToGa button. Obviously we don't have one in, so we have nothing assigned. 31 and 32 is the gear lever, as we can see here. 31, 32. We have the gear set to 0, so that's when it's in the up position, and that will put the gear up. In the down position, gear set parameter of 1 will set it to the down position. 33 has nothing assigned to it. That is the 6th axis detent. So as you can see, when we move the Z axis at the bottom, and 34 is where those rocker switches start. And as you can see, 35 through 47 we've disabled, and we're just making 34 through 46 the evens into switches. So on the first one, on the switched on event, we're going to check to make sure that the parking brake position is 0. If so, we're going to send the parking brakes. Basically, it's a toggle event. It's the only way the parking brakes will work. Same thing, when we switch it off, as long as the parking brake is on, you can go ahead and switch the parking brake off. 36. I'm using this for the wing lights. So in the sim, we'll show you the icing lights. Since on my alpha, I've got all my other lights set up. That's what I did with this switch. This is the ice lights or wing lights. to check to see if there's ice on the wings. Next up, I went with the cabin light set. This doesn't do anything in the TBM, but hopefully they reconnect this and the cabin light switch is no longer only accessible from inside. There's a whole bunch of switches in the TBM since software update 5, inertial separator, the pulse lights, the dimmer switch, the cabin lights. There is a whole bunch of switches. Even the prop de-ice switch won't toggle, even though the light will go on and the variable behind it is going on. So we've got a whole bunch of switches that aren't following. If you want it fixed, go over to the Microsoft Flight Sim forum and look for the Mobi Flight Advanced API wish list item and vote that up, because that's the whole purpose of that, is to get all these things that are called B events that have been disconnected and we don't have access to from the outside to get them implemented. All right, next over, rocker switch. That's where I put the panel lights. So the panel lights on-off event will turn the panel lights on and off, but doesn't control the dimmer switch, just at least turns it on. 42, this is what I've labeled my de-ice. And we've got structural de-ice, and we'll turn it on and off. We have windshield de-ice that will turn on and off. And we intentionally made these separate things because we need to check, is the structural de-ice switch a 0? If so, you can send the toggle event. Same thing with going off. So switched on and switch off have multiple events assigned to them, and that way each one can be out of sync, but with the on, they'll all be on, the off, they'll all be off. 44 is our fuel pump, and the fuel pump select auto. Note, the auto is the XML we can't move the switch. So again, we set the fuel pump to 2, which is auto, and the other switch we actually can't move, but luckily it's in that position usually. And then we're going ahead on the on-off. We're going to do the bleed air source control set. So turn it to auto mode when on, turn it to 1, which is off, when it's off. And again, the switch itself will not move inside of the sim, but you'll see the cast messages are going in and out, and it is turning on, so it will work. And then button 48, as we said, is RX's ToGa button. Down here in the left-hand corner, we've got just the buttons and axes available. Make it a little bit easy just to kind of visualize seeing things go on and off and what they're doing. Let's look up top and get things going. So we want to turn on our batteries. We want to turn on our gen, turn on the autopilot trims. We've got our fuel pump, so that's going to go on. The other one's already in the auto position. Beacon and nav light on. We're going to spool up our starter. And there we are. So you're going to see we're going to move out of that detent. It moves it up into the low. There we go. Things are coming on. Fuel pressure. So now we can go ahead, move up into that high position. That bleed is on the last rocker switch, so we can clear that cast message. So when we map to panel de-ice, button 42, you can see it turns on the windshield. You could see the prop LED goes on. So the prop circuit behind it is going. So the prop de-ice is working, so we know that's good. When we look up top, we can see that our panel light goes on, and you can see the switch move. Panel lights come on, so that's nice. Like we said, the floodlight or cabin lights currently will not move, so those don't come on. And then we have our ice light, so the wing lights, so that's going to come on outside. And then we've got our parking brake, which is going to harass us while we're sitting here. So we're going to go ahead and turn that off. If we turn our selector, so now we're at the top. So you see selector 21. And when you turn your encoder, you're now seeing your altitude select. So we may want to climb up to 4,000. If we click, for example, VS on, and we set the knob to 20, then we have control of our VS. So we can see what our VS will be for the climb. Now if we turn off VS, it'll drop into pitch mode. And now with that knob, we can increase our pitch or decrease it. Flight level change will enable flight level change. And if we go all the way to 17, and we can increase and decrease the speed that we're going to use. So that's the IAS button, button 7, turn off flight level change. Heading mode. So heading. So then we come up to our heading knob. There's our heading knob. And like we said, if we hold that down, it will capture our current heading. For course, you'll see that we're changing that VOR1. So when we come back to the throttle, now that we've gone through the buttons, we can see that we're in the higher part. So if we move that RZ axis all the way to the top, it will shift the lever to the left. And if we pull it back, right around that 75%, that top, between the top two lines, it moves it back over. We can put it down into low. We can bring it back up into high, idle, and now bring it over the gate. And now we can control the throttle with the Y-axis. Then, if we put it into the detent, you see how it goes into beta, into reverse. And if we come up, now we go back into cutoff, and we didn't have to move ahead to bring it back. So that's how you do reverse. And then of course you can just bring it back across, back over. You have full control. Gear, gear, and of course we've got our flaps on the Z axis. If you liked it, please hit that like button. If you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button. It's always good for the channel, and it gives me some encouragement. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.